watching Public Eye, brought to you by the New Vision Movement. And now, here's your host, Dr. Frank McField.
Good evening and welcome to Public Eye Live from the CITN studios. We were on TV last night as well doing a political meeting, and we're on Public Eye because Public Eye is part of our regular broadcast. We've been doing Public Eye since 1997, and we do Public Eye now the first Thursday and the last Wednesday in every month. So although the election campaign is out there and it's very heated and things are going on, we're still continuing to do our Public Eye show because we believe that Public Eye has played a great role in informing people, not just about political issues, also about family issues, social issues, spiritual issues, educational issues, as many issues as we could get people to come on Public Eye to talk about, we were willing to discuss with you. So our trying to bombard the public with all this information is not something that has started simply because we are electioneering. We have been doing this continuously over the years in order to have a much better informed public. And so I think that there is something to be said. Beulah, my sister, also was a co-host of Public Eye, or is a co-host of Public Eye, and she's here with me this evening to not just be a co-host, but also to be one of the candidates that is being interviewed, one of the candidates that are running with the United Democratic Party in the District of Georgetown, and we call ourselves the Force of Four. I also have Mr. Lloyd Sampson, who's an attorney at law and who decided to be with the United Democratic Party, Force of Four, in the District of Georgetown. And we are sorry to say that bad flus and viruses are going around, and therefore we've lost to Mr. John Henry Ebanks this evening, who was not feeling well already last night, but by today he really felt that it would be impossible for him to attend this very, very, very important program, because we have decided to make the program for 2 hours, and it's not very easy to sit here and talk for 2 hours. Is maybe a little different if you're on a political platform and you have an audience, but when you're sitting here and talking basically to the camera and to the unseen audiences, it's something that you need to have quite a bit of skill to pull off. It would have been much nicer if we had 4 people, but we will try with our 3 persons here to make this not only a friendly but also an entertaining and enlightening 2 hours about the politics and about the dynamics of politics and about the institutions of politics and about some of the issues of politics. Because I think that sometimes in this country we begin to talk about Caymanian politics as if Caymanian politics is somehow separated from politics in the world. We are influenced in terms of our political behavior here in the Cayman Islands by what has happened and what continues to happen in other parts of the world, and therefore it's very important for us to have the possibility to have a comparative type of situation whereby we can compare ourselves and our political institutions to those in other countries. One of the interesting points I have found, and I will probably begin by asking Lloyd a question, because Lloyd, you studied law, and did that mean that you also studied political science? Because at one particular time, at least in the United States of America, political science was a prerequisite for law.
Yes, I can only lay claim to one course in my first year of University of the West Indies. It was taught by Professor Monroe, one of the leading luminaries in Jamaican politics. He has a very interesting history, and the course was quite stimulating, I must confess. It was indeed.
And well, I actually was going to study law, so I actually started to do what they called pre-law, which was political science and philosophy. That was a requirement in the United States at that particular time. And I did a lot of the philosophers like Plato, Aristotle, and Augustine, Aquinas, and people like that. And the general idea was for us to begin to understand the evolution of our political institutions.
Indeed.
How it came that in Western society and in Western culture we have embraced the concept of democracies. But Beulah, you must have had a little go at political science at some point.
I did, because when I decided to go to college, I thought I'd do law as well, and so I took the pre-law classes at Miami-Dade. And so in my social science class, we studied a lot about human nature and the development of humanity in its ways, and society and families and social consciousness, and also during the humanity classes, the arts and how they all develop. It was very interesting. I learned a lot.
I must say, Dr. Macfield, as well, the study of law, since both you and Ms. Beulah has touched on it, it's interesting in itself, because it not only helps one to develop an analytical mind, an ability, and I suppose a specific training to wade through, I suppose, some of the waffle and get to the issue of a matter and apply to those facts or issues the relevant principles. But it also tends to allow one to fully appreciate the interrelation between, I suppose, the different agencies that hold sway over a community or a society. And in that sense, it's related to politics, in that one will appreciate properly the need for separation of powers and the different roles the legislature, as distinct from the judiciary, and the executive have to play. So that's, in a way, a means whereby you get an insight.
But people must then understand that the reason why you have certain institutions is because there has been a history behind those institutions, and therefore the man has developed to the type of character that he or she is today. And the institutions which we have and which we embrace, it's something that did not come about just so. It has taken hundreds of years for them to, thousands of years for them to evolve in the form in which they are today. So we are benefiting from our past and the past of the civilizations that we are part of, and how we have been able to separate and how we've been able to understand the need for separation is also the result of some of our experiences that have not always been kind.
Indeed.
Because there have been some very, very, very rough periods in terms of the development of the concept of democracy, one man, one vote. And if you remember the whole concept of the absolute monarch and the evolution of the parliament, the British parliament in particular, I mean, the French was a little bit more traumatic, but the British parliament, the evolution of the Westminster system is very, very, very important in how the people begin to share in the decision-making process or processes with the aristocracy, the people who own the land. And the land was the means of producing.
Right.
If you didn't have land, then you have nothing.
Yes. I believe, unless Beulah wanted to jump in, however, you mentioned one man, one vote. I was just a few days ago browsing through the constitution that was proposed by the commissioners who recently conducted a review and other related matters. And I think, as well, I believe Mr. Bush now has an advisor that is down, and I would encourage anybody who's interested in these matters to see if you could catch him at one of the forums. I think it would be instructive. But at the basis of it, and I think one thing we must strive for, no matter what form ultimately our new constitution takes, that the concept of one man, one vote is something that we must strive very diligently to achieve in the Cayman Islands. It is at the root, the very root of democracy. I'm sure you will appreciate, and it's somewhat contrary to those principles to have our brothers and sisters living in East End and facing all the challenges that we face as Georgetowners, but yet at the end of the day, there is that disparity in the voting power.
But I wouldn't overemphasize that particular principle, because the principle of one man, one vote was not born really in constituencies in that sense, not to mean that.
Right.
Not to mean, it means I have one vote just like you have one vote. We all are equal in voting, but it doesn't mean that the East End and West Bay and situation, which I think a lot of people here have touted that, but that is not, and this is the reason why I think it's important that people understand history and the historical development of the principles that will influence the formation of their constitutions and the democratic principles which they take up, because they were not the breeders of these principles. These principles were born and nurtured by societies that have sacrificed much to maintain them and to defend them. And you know, that's one of the reasons why when we start talking about a constitution, I think, and maybe I'm jumping off and saying too much, but when we're talking about a constitution, we must be talking about something that goes beyond copying.
Indeed.
It must be something that is essential to our very being and our very, very soul. We must plant in a political document and in our political behavior something that goes beyond just the material.
Ultimately, that document that carries us, I suppose, into the realm of nationhood must, as you say, go much further than principles we have copied and what have you. These principles can be and should be, I believe, given credence to the history that we've discussed, guiding principles and a blueprint for where we want to go. But I think it is obviously something that we must take in stages, and at this stage, giving the pressing need that we have, I believe, to at least evolve beyond the 1972 Constitution and the, I suppose, extended say or input that might or might not give us in the affairs of the country one way or the other. Dictates that some step forward at least.
But what I want to also point out, illuminate, is the way in which the Honorable McKeever Bush has gone about dealing with the constitutional issue already reflects the political play, the political realities. When we were given by the United Kingdom the possibility to evaluate our Constitution, and when a Constitutional Commission was called, Mr. Benson Ebanks, I think, was one of the members of the Constitutional Commission. What is happening here is they're saying, look, you do an evaluation of the constitutional document as purely a legal document, or as just something that will guide, but what is in there about you and what you feel and what people have tested and what people desire from the point of view of their sovereignty and their autonomy is not going to be called into question by people who are very, 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 let's say, technical about designing these things. So when it is stopped, and when you get the political will of the people reflecting a little bit more in the Constitution, what is it that we desire in the form of leadership? What kind of leadership? Just like a chief minister, leader of government business, or a premier, or what kind of leader? What kind of formations do you want to have in terms of making decisions? Now, those are questions that really should go beyond technical issues, because otherwise you're not interested in them.
I think that one of the things that we need to look at is the social anthropology of the development of humanity in itself, and culture and society. And for instance, you know, we've sat and we've discussed it, but what we need to look at is that we need to have some type of identity in our Constitution, not simply a document that is sent to us and say, okay, look at these are the type of modifications that you can make to this Constitution, but rather say, okay, let's go back and let's be able to draw up a Constitution that reflects who we are as a people, taking into account all of our heritage, our Christian heritage, our seafaring heritage, the entire thing, and then bringing forth a document that reflects who we are. The one man, one vote concept is not a bad concept, but is it truly our concept? I think that's what we need to look at.
Are we passionate about it? How passionate are we about it? Because all the people that have a constitution is that thing which governs you. It's the covenant. It's the sharing of the blood. It's the covenant. And most people have gotten it through some kind of turmoil. Nobody has been handed a constitution.
Yes. I'd like to think we're far removed, hopefully. The way things have been going recently, one can't, necessarily
Well, I mean,
say.
maybe that's the reason why a constitution is not as important to our people as it has been to other people, is because we are not involved in fomenting the Constitution, because the Constitution has to be more than legal jargon. It must reflect the identity of the people, the aspiration of the people.
And when you think about yourself as a people, and I think that's something that is a new reality to Caymanian, as thinking of ourselves as a people, not as a segment of some other people, distant though it be. But as a people ourselves, then how are we going to be identified to the world? For instance, when I look at the American Constitution, or when I took a look at the Russian Constitution, it told you the identity of those particular peoples. It told you their ideology, their beliefs, political, social, and otherwise. Does our Constitution reflect who we are as a people?
I think, again, I approach it from a slightly different angle, and that's why I've enjoyed our last few weeks together, because we can always agree to disagree on various issues. And I think I understand, or I do understand, what at the end of the day we need to achieve is something that is reflective of who we are as a people. But I don't think that I could stress, from my point of view, enough the need to have at least, because a constitution, other than reflecting the culture of the people, is a document whereby certain procedural and other attendant norms are addressed and laid out for all to see. And there's much to be said for a degree of advancement along those lines, so that a person's role is spelled out, certain attendant human rights and other bills of rights are spelled out, so that one can have a clearer definition, I think, of an ordered society and the order that we intend to put towards a society. And I think that has to be a prerequisite and a part of the process, and perhaps the first step that we take. Get used to the various institutions and procedural matters that are attendant on modern governance.
Yeah, but we are a development, an evolution of a society that has already existed, as I'm saying. So not all these things are strange to us. So we don't have to go back and make the same primitive formations and sacrifices. We have benefited from those, but what we're saying is that you must understand those in understanding a constitution, even our constitution, which is an appendix of a larger constitution. I mean, the British have had no written constitution.
Well, they don't have one.
They don't
have one, which is quite ironic.
Well,
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And they are having more and more problems in not having a written constitution, simply because of their relationships with other nations that have come after them and have decided that they need written constitutions in order for people to know exactly what
historically it has been the path that I suppose all Commonwealth nations, but definitely here in the West Indies and elsewhere, have followed. And I suppose the lawyer in me is attracted to the written document. And it clearly defines things and lets one know in no uncertain terms. But the dynamics that happen within that is something that can't be written and you know, perhaps shouldn't be written. Those are cultural norms that are peculiar to us.
But just you know, sitting here, the three of us who are definite running mates and have a common ideology and dream, and here we are discussing the Constitution and looking at it from three different perspectives.
Indeed.
So a constitution is not something that you can readily throw together.
No, indeed.
You know, so to take the time and to discuss the Constitution and to investigate the ideas that are truly within us to bring forth into our Constitution.
Well, the point, Beulah, is that you can't throw a Constitution together just like that. That's exactly what we're going to get. A Constitution is thrown together. That was the intention, just like you throw laws together, because there is such a thing as that you can go and buy a package, a model. You want a law, labor law, you go someplace and you get it.
Well, all law is based ultimately on precedent, isn't it? So that.
But not only that, but the profession is a profession where duplications become the norm sometimes. So that, and I think this is perhaps one of my criticisms of law and lawyers, is that sometimes they tend to operate too much within the confines of what is already defined through precedent, and that there have been people there who have had the authority to create those precedents. But on the outside of the courts, now out on the outside of the judicial system, you have people who are making history, and you have people in a sense who are making it through their personalities and their emotions and the new ways of approaching their culture, the new ways of combing their hair, of dancing, of singing and doing all those things. And the law must therefore evolve to be able to accommodate those changes in society.
Well,
therefore, Parliament being important.
Well, to defend the profession, I think I am duty bound. There is an aspect. There is an aspect of the profession, obviously, the common law that is reflective of exactly that, separate and apart from written legislation, which a government or a legislature might prepare, and that is a very dynamic law and has evolved through hundreds and hundreds of years, and is reflective of the community.
Of the changes within the society, yes.
And individual communities as well. Because
But I wasn't going to really sort of, because I mean, we are people who in politics have always said, like, if we get too many lawyers in our parliament, we're going to really have a problem, because I mean, lawyers really have a particular way of thinking, and maybe I'm not saying this because of you. I may be saying this because of Mr. Alden McLaughlin more than because of you, because my experience of him operating in the Parliament has been very, 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 very interesting to observe. So
I use the term on the first night of the rally, the occupational hazard, and there's no doubt that as lawyers we're trained to think in a certain way. And indeed hold very strong opinions. So I'm not surprised that yourself and Mr. McLaughlin might have locked heads on an occasion or two in the House. But I think that's why there's 15 of us. God forbid, I would agree that there would be 15 lawyers in the Legislative Assembly. But luckily, there are educators, there are sociologists such as yourself, and the collaborative process should be one that could be to the overall benefit, I think, of the community, because legal minds do have their place. I think even you would concede that.
Definitely. That's the reason why we have you on the team, Lloyd, because we do believe that the legal mind has the contributions to make, because we need to, although we have emotions, although we have feelings, they should be structured, and they should be able to operate within specific, defined principles, and therefore, even within the Legislative Assembly, a debate in itself has specific defined principles, and we must therefore operate within that. But one of the reasons why I like your deliveries at the political meeting is because you're not trying to copy the us in the way we speak. You are speaking from your very calm, your very legalistic.
From his discipline.
Yeah, from your discipline. You're not breaking with your discipline, and I think that I admire that. I think that there are a lot of people that have noticed that, and they have admired that.
Well, I think now that you've touched on that, Dr. Frank, and I'm not wanting to in any way direct the discussions, but I believe that the Caymanian voting public at this stage has evolved, and we've been talking about evolution, and they're much more sophisticated. And whilst individual players on the political scene have their own styles, I think we must be careful that what it is that we're attempting to do, especially at this crucial time and at this particular election, is provide the voting public with the sort of information that they can make an informed decision. And I think I would be derelicting my duty if, in fact, I approached it from any other angle.
But coming to the topic of information and providing the public with information, and there's so many people that say that public is really perception, that politics is mainly perception, is what people perceived. That's simplifying it, of course, quite a bit, because if people were provided with accurate information by politicians and by the other institutions that are responsible for disseminating information, then people should be able to go beyond perception. People should be able to state exactly what it is that they believe about the realities in which they are living in, and the other person's presentations with regards to those realities. And that brings us into a very important institution which has been around from the time that we have had democracy, because you cannot have democracy without information. And so that's a very, very, very important thing. If we are going to give people the rights to vote, then they must have the right to have access to information. Therefore, for governments to become more transparent is important. But somebody has to disseminate that transparency. Somebody has to convey that transparency to the general public and to those persons who will use that information later on to vote. And that, in our society, happens to be the media. Media has played a very, very important role in determining elections and shaping perceptions in many countries. And there are those politicians that recognize from the very beginning, if you don't have a good relationship with the media, then the way in which people perceive you through the media will be not as positive, perhaps, as it should be. It brings us to for instance, one of the papers in the Cayman Islands which I like to speak about, and that is the news, the net news, which is actually the editor-in-chief, I think, is Mr. Desmond Seals. No, I don't think that. I should know that he's in the editor-in-chief of the net news. Now, United Democratic Party government has been having quite a lot of problems with this particular newspaper and an editor of this newspaper. I, in particular, must say that when I understood at one particular time that there was some type of rift between the newspaper and the leader of government business, the Honorable McKeever Bush, at some particular point, that I continued to support the editor of this newspaper, because I was of the opinion that the media should be free, that it should not be interfered by anyone. But as a result of certain actions by the editor of this newspaper, you begin to think that the newspaper is not free. And you do not make a newspaper free simply because you don't say anything bad about it, or you don't say that the newspaper has influence and that influence might be negative influence. So freedom really does not mean to give somebody the ability to do what they want. Freedom is also the fact that there are responsibilities that each institution in democracy has. In terms of the American Constitution and their idea of freedom of the press, they have themselves had to ask, does that freedom mean that he should have a naked woman on top of the newspaper for everybody to see? No, there are some things that should not be done. And so who tells the media, who says to the media what should be done and what should not be done? who discusses the question of editorial responsibility. We hear about political responsibility. We hear about those politicians and the fact that they must have dignity and they must have responsibility and they must be transparent. But who discusses something as important as newspapers, radios, and television programs in this country? And the reason why I want to bring this out is because at one particular point, after I had supported Mr. Seals against the opinions of the government at one particular point not to put any news ads in his paper, and we fought for that, me and a few other colleagues, and the government decided at least that they would not say that this was a negative newspaper and that it had a negative impact on the Cayman Islands, especially abroad, and therefore those of us who wanted to advertise with the paper should continue to advertise with the paper. I continued to advertise with the paper through my ministry. Not only that, but I think around the time of December 2003, going on 2004, getting ready for the 2004 elections in November, I and Mr. Desmond Seals, who we have known one another for many, many, many years, decided that he persuaded me that what I needed really was that I needed to have his company, which is another company than the news company, be responsible for helping me with my public relations. He seems to have had pretty good ideas about what I should do and what I shouldn't do. I was not necessarily 100% of the opinion that this was necessary since I had the Public Eye show, and I felt that I have done quite a lot to show people how I think and what I'm thinking about and when I'm thinking about these things and how other people think as well. But he was of the opinion that not only should he become involved in creating my Public Eye show, but creating other things for me. And one of the things that he wanted to do was that he wanted to do some PR for me. Now, there are a lot of people that find it very difficult to understand how the person who is the editor, who's a publisher in chief, who seems to determine the editorial direction, can at the same time have a PR firm that is dealing with politicians. I, at that particular point, decided to take his advice and to actually pay him to be a so-called political consultant, since it was his concept, his idea, and he persuaded me of that. And that's the reason why I have the checks in my pocket, because I have checks that was made out on March 2004. And 2004, of course, we would be going towards the elections in November 2004. I have one check here for $5,000. I have another check for $5,000, and that's CI. One in January 2000, because in December when we met, I gave him the first check. This is on December the 27th, 2003. I gave him $5,000 because I wanted to make sure that we launched the campaign early so that we were coming into 2004. And I knew that Beulah was interested in the election, and the truth of the matter is I thought that maybe she might do well with a little bit of help from the point of the PR. But he came to a point where after Mr. McKeever Bush decided that he was going to bring a suit against him, Mr. Seals called me up and said to me that he was going to take me out and that I was going to be taken out by friendly fire. I said, how friendly can fire be if it's going to take you out? Now, the reason why he was saying that he was going to take me out was because I refused to distance myself from the Honorable McKeever Bush, who he had decided at that particular time that he was going to take out. Now, the interesting thing, if you go back a little distance before my involvement with Mr. Seals, which is documented at least on the 27th of December 2003, and you go back and you look at Mr. McKeever's relationship with Mr. Desmond Seals after the so-called coup in November of 2001, and how Mr. Seals used his newspaper, and he will admit that he used his newspaper to give Mr. McKeever a greater profile than that which he had at that particular time. And he wrote no evil about Mr. McKeever Bush at that particular time. And also his involvement with the Ritz-Carlton that always advertised also on the back of his paper, a full ad on the back of his paper. And everybody who remember that Ritz-Carlton ad on the back of the net news will remember the fact that was at that particular point that you could not say anything bad about the Ritz-Carlton development. And all of a sudden, he falls out with Mr. Bush, he falls out with the Ritz-Carlton, and he starts to write whatever it is that he wants to write that is bad. Nothing more is ever positive about them. The same thing happened to me. When he decided at that particular point that I was not going to leave the Honorable McKeever Bush and that he intended to take him out, and he said that to me, that he intends to do that. He will do anything to take him out, anything meaning anything from the point of view of his PR. I am not sure what he'll do in any other terms. I'm not going to say that. But it's important for people to understand that we need to warn people about how he goes after the national housing, how he goes after the hospital, how he goes after everything. And it's very interesting here when he starts to talk about a letter which disturbed retired seamen, and to show how he twists things, how he uses words like, with quite a number of copies of the letter now in circulation. It is reported that one has been given to the elections office, and as a result of the numerous complaints, it is possible that an investigation may be initiated. The supervisor of election, Kearney Gomez, was unable to comment on the letter or its contents, which he said he has seen. But if he's not able to comment, the supervisor of election, then how can the editor of this paper say that an investigation may be initiated? Where does he get the information that an investigation may be initiated? Who initiates investigations into political matters? So he goes on. According to the election law, there are strict guidelines about good conduct during election campaign that dictate that candidates can or what candidates can or cannot do in the course of a given campaign. The retired seafarer said that this letter from the minister should be considered illegal and contrary to the election law. It is disrespectful to all of us, but not only that, it should be illegal, he added. Several efforts to contact Dr. Frank McPhail for comment on this report was unsuccessful. So you see how he leaves it. He does not even leave the possibility for a comment from me. Now, if you compare that with the news in the Compass, that goes the headline. I think I can't even remember what the headline was, but it did not go that far. And plus, the headline started with the letter. It started with evidence. It started with facts. It started with what I had said. Then it went to the fact that someone was disturbed by what I had said. Then it went to the fact of putting in reports and comments from the past minister, Edna Moyle. Totally different kind of journalism, because even if the person who writes for the Compass is using the headlines to get your attention, at least the person, once he gets your attention, is telling the story. Mr. Seals cannot afford to tell the story. And this is the reason why the United Democratic Party have some very, very serious issue with the way in which he interprets freedom of the press. I don't see how this man can talk about freedom when on one hand he says he wants to be paid, and on the other hand he says, well, he will publish whatever. So the question is, how many politicians now running for election find themselves in a similar position that I found myself in on the 27th of December 2003, where they have hired his PR firm. Now, I'd like him to do an investigation and to tell the public how many politicians have paid or are paying his PR firm, and what kind of influence does that have on the way in which he describes their conduct and their performance? I am asking the people with good sense who understand what I'm saying to begin to boycott the net news, especially the supporters of the Honorable McKeever Bush and the United Democratic Party, not to do this. The reason why we have ads still going in the paper is because one of the checks happened to have been made out to the net news, because when my wife made it out, she didn't make it out to Mr. Seals because she wasn't aware, and so she made it out to the newspaper. So we had a credit. And so we run these ads in order to use up the credit, because there's no other way we're going to get back from it. And I'd like to say this again. If we're talking about democracy, if we're talking about the evolution of the democratic process, if we understand the importance of the dissemination of information to allow people to make decisions about what is good and what is bad about the political performance of their government, then we have to make sure that people who have licensed to operate newspapers are doing so fairly and squarely, and that they're not subverting the process. He asks me to be transparent. They ask us to declare our interests. I'm asking him to declare his, to be transparent about his relationship and what type of pay that he gets in order to promote certain types of people. So whether or not he's running a poll to tell you what is happening in Cayman or not, whatever it is that he's doing, he needs to be more transparent. Now, there was an article also in his net news talking about the rally which was held by the PPM, and I don't know if I can find a copy of that paper. But he says thousands of people. Thousands of people. Now, if you hadn't been there, you really believe that thousands of people were there. That is irresponsible journalism. Irresponsible journalism. Mr. Seals approached me the year that he came back from prison to ask me whether or not I would allow him to do a newspaper, do a newsletter for me. He had not started the net news. I was doing the New Vision. The New Vision. I sent newspapers out to people called a New Vision. And according to him, it was okay, but it could be improved. He could do this, he could do that, he could do the other thing. Unfortunately, I was just a poor politician from the block. I had no resources to employ him, and I thought we were doing the job that we needed to do, and so as a result of that, he went on and he was successful in starting something. And the man has worked very hard. He has worked very hard. He works night and day, I know that. But he has to stop, and we have to stop him from manipulating the minds of the people in this country by printing what he wants and not what the facts are. He should be held accountable, just like we should be held accountable. And that is another institution within democracy that if that doesn't work, if there's interference by the press in the political process, you have as much of a problem as when the political process interferes with the press. So, ladies and gentlemen, I know that he will react to this, and he will not be nice, because he understands that when you go as far out as he has gone to determine who the government is going to be in this country, you're taking a terrible risk, and it must be for an incredible price. He has to be very careful that what he does is not totally uncovered, because people are not stupid, and you can fool some of the people some of the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time. And I'm going to get away from Mr. Seals, but I will remind you of the fact that the institution of the press, the media, is as important as any other in determining how your country is run. if they are going to be the ones who take the information from the so-called transparent government or non-transparent government and transport it to you, then they should bring it to you the way they got it. They should not be changing it with their own subjective opinions. Sorry about that one. I mean, we can get to a lighter topic, though.
Before we leave the press, however, though, there are a few comments that I think bear making. I think we'll all agree, and all right-thinking people will agree, that a free and vigorous press is essential to any civilized community. But as you've outlined, there is a certain degree of responsibility, or much responsibility, really, that comes with that freedom. And if we take the current situation with the net news for an example, there have been criticisms of the way campaigns have been conducted from the platform, and people are of the opinion that there's much too much bashing and mudslinging and what have you, and they say that that is bringing the process into disrepute. What I would caution, though, is that you have to also realize that if every day you get up and we read in the papers and there's this dissemination of information, because there is e-news and what have you, it's not just confined to our shores, that the government is corrupt, and that has been a cry that has been raised and given some voice to. And we hear that repetitively, and I think one of the supporters of the opposition, in fact, called in and made just that point on Talk Today, that there is bad information that's out there. What we have to realize is that the government spends millions of dollars regulating our financial industry, promoting our tourism product, and on the whole, enhancing the worldview of the Cayman Islands. That sort of, or anything, journalism or otherwise, that contradicts that process is irresponsible, as equally responsible as any name calling or any other activity that they may want to criticize as part of the campaign process. What I would invite all concerned to do, and I think we all do as well, is deal not so much with scare tactics of corruption and wild-scale graft, but attack the government rather than on policies that you see have failed, things that they have not done. Critique them on performance, as opposed to raising this all-encompassing cry of corruption. I think that is as equally as reprehensible as any other campaign tactic that has evolved during this process. Mr. Seals obviously has taken a certain view, and as you say, one has to be diligent in how one reads things and processes information that one gets from whatever, I suppose, radio house or whatever it emanates from. But it's a tricky business being a kingmaker, and I understand there's a lot of sort of that business going around, and it's bound to be in the election business. But as you say, it's not the responsibility of any editor or any one corporation to attempt to be a kingmaker. If demanding a free press and a responsible press, then your job is to disseminate information impartially, and that is really your duty. And any time that you stray from that, you get into very sticky grounds. And I think that has a lot to do with, I suppose, the current atmosphere that exists between the government and the particular newspaper. Yeah. But those would really be my views on the situation.
I think that's the newspaper, any media. We won't just limit it to newspaper, but any media has a right or has an obligation to give news impartially, and as impartially as any human being can do that. But when we take up personal vendettas and we use what is a political, or what is definitely an office of great influence to the people to sell our own poison, I think that you know, we just do a great disservice to the people, because right now there are a number of great issues that could be reported on in the newspaper. There are great arguments to be made, both pro and con, for the opposition, the government, the PDA, or any other person that's running, rather than just looking at the fact like, I need to get back, I need to destroy. And you said, you know, playing the role of the kingmaker is a very dangerous game.
Yes.
You know, and not just to the persons that are personally involved, but to the public as a whole, because of the disinformation that is put out there and how it negatively affects the choices that they make. And that's the danger.
And the feelings that people have towards each other. Politically. I mean, the hardening of a lot of this is also being fueled by the fact that we know that people are sitting there, or at least he's sitting there, pretending that he can determine the outcome of these things.
It must be as well, Dr. Frank, a very tricky line to tread between your functions as the CEO or managing director of a public relations firm and an editor-in-chief of a newspaper. I think they're quite distinct. And again, any blurring of the lines, again, can't be healthy ultimately.
Well, okay,
difficult.
But the reason why I'm saying that is just it's the same thing. If they say, okay, well, I have a trucking company. But that's not acceptable. And he's saying no. What he does is acceptable because he is objective enough to be able to separate the two.
Yes. I think I'm glad you raised that, because we hear the term conflict of interest.
Yes.
I think your situation, and I think good thinking people would realize this, didn't qualify as a conflict of interest. A conflict of interest, to my mind at least, and there may be people that may differ with me on this opinion, but arises where you or any other minister or person in authority utilizes information to which only they are privy, to their own benefit. In August or September of last year, when you bought your trucks, I think that information that the island needed cleaning up and there might be the need for trucks
was available to everyone.
It was available island-wide.
Whoever didn't know.
I think
a lot of people have used that information because all you got to do is look and see all the trucks around the place. So, and again, Lloyd, and thanks for bringing that up, because sometimes I'm a little bit hesitant in defending myself on those particular levels. But also, had I been the only one allowed to bring in trucks, again, it would have, to me, been
I understand as well, and since we're on conflict of interest, that prior to Ivan or shortly there, I'm not a trucker or a heavy equipment man myself, that it was quite difficult for, say, an independent contractor, a young Caymanian who might have found the funds to purchase a truck, to actually get the truck onto the island and working, because there would have to be, I don't know whether there were licensing issues, but there would have to be an approval from some association or board or what have you before he could do so. And when you look at the composition of those boards, almost invariably, they're comprised by the big players in the industry.
Exactly.
To my mind, that is a conflict of interest. By extension, and touching back on, I suppose, the net news, there is a series of questions asked. I think the 20 questions or what have you, everybody should be familiar with that, concerning whether ministers should be allowed to have companies and what have you. I'm at a loss as to why a community or the voters or electors would want to have a minister or any person in government that is solely dependent on the earnings from that position as a government minister. Then I think it makes the job that much more fraught with difficulties. It should be encouraged, I think, that ministers can make a living, anybody can make a living outside of the government, rather than having to rely strictly on a government salary. But clearly assets have to be declared, and we must be diligent when it comes back to the same conflict of interest situation. But why would you want to leave a man?
Historically, ministers have had that privilege.
In fact, there have been some of our biggest businessmen.
Yes. for instance, some of the biggest law firms have grown
I mean, it's
out
true.
of that connection.
Yeah, I mean, mention Mr. Truman Barton, who
Exactly.
who started as a young lawyer, entered the politics. If you mention Mr. Captain Charles O'Connell, if you mention Mr. Norman Barton,
Exactly.
if you mention whoever, I mean, who can't?
Benson.
Mr. Benson.
They didn't have to
People must
diverse
be allowed
themselves.
to make
They did not have to diverse themselves of any business, and indeed that business was allowed to grow.
And the advance in the Cayman Islands was when we said here that you had to declare your interest.
Yes.
It would be a registrar of interest, and you would have to declare it, but not that you would have to devour yourself.
Without it, it makes the job too important to the politician. You
Yeah,
don't
right,
know
and then
what
you
a
have-
man
you
is
have
going
to-
to do
right,
to preserve his
exactly,
livelihood.
exactly.
If it's the only livelihood that he has.
That's what I thought too.
Yeah.
You don't want to get to that extreme point
Exactly.
where you'll do anything to keep your job,
Yes.
to survive. You
But,
want to.
you know, the thing again is looking at other societies and other places, and this is a historical thing for every nation. I mean, in the United States, in England, Jamaica, wherever, politicians ultimately need to have another life.
They have one other life. As a matter of fact. A lot of people think we don't have any other life, but we
they
do
must.
have. We have children, we have
exactly.
wives, we have mothers,
And businesses.
And, you know, we have responsibilities,
Responsibilities,
and
exactly.
you know. But I you know, to tell you the truth, because I didn't buy the trucks in any case, I leased the trucks, and I was a little bit sort of ambitious, I think, because I don't think that I'm necessarily a good businessman, but
Join the club.
I wanted to do something. There was a possibility that it would be a good time to start something. But just like I had a good idea, a lot of other people had a good idea. And you know what happens when too many people have a good idea?
Yes.
Some people lose money, and that's what's happened to me.
But you
But
know,
the free market always determines
Exactly,
that, and that is
exactly,
what fuels
exactly.
are
And there,
very.
of course, there's some people that would prefer that if we say we limit it to a few of those. And you were asking the question, before you had an organization called HEHO. That would be like the Scots and the Bartons.
Oh.
And that goes all the way back to Mr. Jim Barton regime,
I see.
when they were only satisfied when they were the only people. Mr. Rupert Moxon, for instance, was one of the people in that. When they would be the only people, the small little group that would have a monopoly on heavy equipment in this country, so that they could set the price, and there would be nobody that could come in to compete, and therefore it would not be the market factors that would determine, but the mere fact that they had access to the government that made the decision. And at that particular point, they participated in the decision-making process. It wasn't the government so much as them, although it came under the Ministry of Tourism because of Mr. Jim Barton. And that is why today it's still under the Ministry of Tourism. And Mr. McKeever's approach that has been completely different. So young people who want to bring in trucks have been allowed to bring in trucks. People who want to bring in aggregate have been able to come and bring in aggregate. It's not the monopoly that people had before is no longer there, and that is what upset a particular class of people in this country, the fact that they cannot secure their businesses by preserving a monopoly.
I think it's ultimately healthier, though, that obviously that the market is opened up, and that persons have a chance not only to participate. From that point of view alone, it's laudable, but also it ultimately benefits the Caymanian consumer.
It does.
And it should all be about the consumer.
And that's what open and free market is all about. I mean, you can't preach democracy, and you can't shout capitalism and then go around acting on a socialist type of ideology where
communist, not socialist. That's the way that they do it in Cuba. I mean, they're like, you can have this, the government will have a part of this, and this one can't have this, and everybody is limited, because that's the only way they know how to do things, is by limiting the entrepreneurial desires that people have. But entrepreneurial ideas and desires that people have can also lead them into great economic and financial issues. But that's why we have companies, that you can form a company so your liabilities are limited. So the experience capitalist countries are not going to hold you at ransom simply because you have not been able to be successful economically.
It causes people to expand their thought and their and their boundaries, because they have to be innovative in order to stay ahead of the game rather than just sitting around and doing things the same old way all the time. So,
And Lloyd, the whole thing is that there are a lot of people that think that without capitalism, you wouldn't have democracy. And without democracy, you wouldn't have capitalism, because the two are complementary.
Indeed.
So you're not going to have a truly democratic country unless you begin to take risk. And even our relationship to labor here in this country, in terms of and Gordon Barlow has said this many times, and a lot of people don't want to understand what he's saying, but free labor is a very important part of capitalistic development. I should have as much access to that labor as you have, but then you say, no, I brought him in on a work permit, and you can't get him. If anything, he has to go, and you have to bring in another one.
As you speak of that, a very interesting topic arose again on Talk today, and because Joel's my friend, they're going to think I'm touting him or accuse me of touting him on the airways. But again, a very interesting, I think he was in Congress, he had guests on who raised the issue, and there were callers subsequently who discussed it with him. The question of mobility of persons on permits, and whether that ultimately is beneficial to what we would call the native Caymanian. The idea that one isn't necessarily indentured to a particular employer rather, so that the permit then is at large.
It should be at large.
And
yes,
that other agencies then can compete for your services.
Yeah.
The thinking is that it would bring a parity to the workforce, because a lot of our Caymanians, and we're a proud set, and simply will say, look, I'm not doing that job for $5 an hour or $4 an hour, because I'm worth more than that, and they take that attitude. But the balance isn't there, because you can hire a foreign national who maybe can do it for 3 or 4. But if there was that mobility of a foreign worker, then an employer, a particular employer, then would be more likely to treat that employee with some value, and so that if they knew that tomorrow, if you paid him for, just like the Caymanian, he would be gone.
Exactly.
You give people rights. You give people rights. You go back to slavery.
Exactly.
You give people rights, and they move. They have mobility, because unless you force a person to stay in a position, they will go to the position that they feel their self-interest is being served.
And it's saying very little about us as a nation if we have the only way that we feel that we can compete, and the only way that we feel that we can offer a product is through slave labor, really.
But Beulah, what we have to understand again is the historical development. The people who created these first immigration laws, why they created them. And I always say, no, they were not created to protect the working Caymanians.
No.
They were created to protect those employers.